I'll just start off by introducing Chinmayi. She is a 17-year-old undergraduate sophomore at Columbia University. She is pursuing a mix of neuroscience, life sciences, and medical humanities. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Simply Neuroscience, an international nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting interdisciplinary neuroscience and psychology education, outreach, and awareness. And outside of neuroscience, she is a student researcher, girls in STEM advocate, youth science communicator, and martial artist. Thank you so much, Chinmayi, for being here today. I will hand it over to you now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming in today. Also, would you like me to screen share? There we go. Thank you. Awesome. So yeah, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I'm really looking forward to sharing with you guys today a little bit more about my personal journey in STEM and specifically neuroscience, and also talk about kind of advice in the transition from high school to college, tips, things that I found useful from older peers, things like that. So I'm overall just going to be taking you through a journey of interdisciplinary STEM and neuroscience. If we could go to the next slide, please. All right, so I like to think of my STEM journey, or as I like to think of it, brain journey, starting with simply a pipette and a brain model. So I kind of stumbled across STEM in a sense during early middle school and high school, I would say. In 7th grade, I believe, 7th grade summer, I was in a biotechnology course and we were playing around with pipettes. This was my first time seeing a pipette. If you haven't heard of what a pipette is, it's basically a tool used by scientists in laboratory settings that's often used to transfer chemicals from one container to another, measure out things like that. So a pipette, yes, the colors of a pipette, colors of the slides, thank you. Shout out to Canva. So pipettes are usually not really introduced in early high school education. It's something that you might run into in AP biology or similar AP courses advanced on in high school. Most people don't come across them until college. So you can imagine that I was very fascinated in what this cool new tool was. And that was honestly my first introduction to biology, biotechnology before high school, and it honestly blew my mind. Coming to a little bit later middle school, early high school, I was at a science fair. I was presenting a project about reusing a material known as fenugreek and creating it to use biodegradable materials at a science fair. Quite a different vein of interest from what I am involved in now, but I was at a science fair and there was a lady who had a brain model set up at a table. Now I had taken out this brain model, it was a plastic little thing, and I'd taken it apart into pieces. And then when it was time to go, my mom was calling me. I was trying to put them all back together, but then I realized that I didn't know how to quite do that. So there I was 13 years old. This elder lady is looking at me like, can you clean up and, go on? So I just kind of awkwardly try to put things back together in the brain and go on with the rest of the science fair day. Now, that was probably the spark that got me into neuroscience, I would say. And for context, neuroscience study of the brain, nervous system, behavior, number of things, is sort of sitting at the niche of biology, psychology, and other related fields. But since it is a niche concept that usually falls under the biology umbrella, it's not often touched upon in early K-12 education. For instance, the first mention of neuroscience that I came across in high school, my high school experience, was in AP biology when we were studying a little one-day unit looking at the anatomy of the brain as a part of the human body system. And then it was addressed that neuroscience was also a field in biology and related to human anatomy. Later on in high school, probably the next instance was only in AP psychology. And of course, AP psychology is now becoming more widespread in the curriculum, but it is basically the only way for students to get involved in learning about the brain to some extent in existing educational curriculum. That also lines up with NGSS standards, if some of you guys are familiar with that through school education in the US here. So can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. I'll tell you a little bit more about what I was up to in high school. I kind of stumbled around STEM for a little bit, thought it was pretty cool. I enjoyed learning about the human body and learning about how we functioned as humans. So in early high school, I was taking, regular science courses, biology, chemistry, good old physics. Physics was quite difficult for me, to be honest, at the start, but I got over that and began exploring my general science interests. That is very interesting. I considered maybe going into the medical field at some point, like many of us do at a younger age. I would like to say that probably the most impactful course actually that I took in high school was probably a course called AP Human Geography, which is in the STEM course. Why I think this is so impactful is that it is one of those few courses in high school that introduces you to a multidisciplinary lens of thinking. So human geography is not just thinking about, first of all, maybe to define it, because human geography is kind of a wonky word, couple of words. It looks at human distributions across the globe, how societies work, how we've developed over time, interactions, basically. There's a lot of different components. Political science also comes into it. There's a bit of geography, of course, with getting to know everything that's going on. Psychology comes in. It's honestly a wonderful blend of many different fields and disciplines. It's a wonderful introduction to both the humanities and the sciences. So getting back on track to why I'm telling you about this, human geography and other courses really present a different way of perspective and thinking about approaching education. And this sort of a framework for understanding science is super important for many of us who are interested in science fairs, for instance, where it's really based around scientific inquiry and getting to explore science and STEM through a hands-on approach. Can we go to the next slide, please? Have some pictures for y'all to make it more colorful, not just staring at a few words. I can go around kind of the different pictures and explain what I was doing in each of these, kind of tell you a little bit more about my background. As I mentioned, science fairs, it's something that's very near and dear to me. I greatly value the ability to find an issue and learn all that you can about it, Google search for on and on and on, hours and hours and hours, and be able to come up with an insightful way to maybe add on to what we know about it, or perhaps to create a prototype, an idea of some sorts that could address a gap in a certain issue. So honestly, I think science fairs are, oh, all good, keep on going. I think science fairs are a great way for younger students in, starting from middle school, high school, to really get involved in the scientific process. I know it's a scientific process is something that's thrown around a lot, but the idea of taking knowledge that you know from high school, and being able to apply it to a concrete project of sorts to make a meaningful difference is something that's really important, and something that is not just because it's personally fulfilling, but because it can make a difference. One of my early experiences with science fairs, I told you about how I was working with kind of biodegradable materials in middle school, but later as I shifted into psychology and neuro more a little bit, I was looking into projects such as correlations between factors of depression, which is something that is not quite investigated so much. When we usually think of depression, we might think that someone with a history of alcohol or drug abuse, for instance, or perhaps a difficult familial system at home might be at risk for developing depression. But also there's some really interesting links. Alcohol abuse and actually eating disorders, there's a link with that. There's also indigestion problems that can contribute to a part of the whole situation. So you find those interesting links that can add on to existing literature, things like that. That was my first taste, honestly, of knowing that, hey, as a 15, 16-year-old, my little scientific inquiry can still make a difference. And I think that's very valuable. Later on in high school, continued to get involved in hands-on research, mostly through cold contacting. I lived in a suburban town that was near Sacramento, so NorCal, but not quite the Bay Area. And there weren't too many opportunities in science, to be honest. It was a very tech-heavy community. Intel was pretty close by, so that was honestly, Intel's obviously a powerhouse in tech and computer science, but that wasn't quite my interest. I didn't really fit into sort of coding or technology as sort of my own personal inclinations. So cold contacting was really important for me early on in high school in terms of reaching out to different opportunities that were outside of my community's little bubble. And the reason that I wanted to reach out to those opportunities, of course, is because I wanted to further my education and such and create a new opportunity for myself when I felt that there was a gap. So I think that's one important thing to take away, is that when you find that something is lacking in your community perhaps, or you're not really getting the most out of your existing resources in your community, it's really important to reach out for support. And this could be through, I know there's multiple like Slack communities that we see these days, especially with online kind of communities during the pandemic, but reach out to peers for support. Some of your friends might know about cool virtual opportunities that you might have never come across before, and they can contribute. If there's older high school students that you're in touch with at your school, upperclassmen are always happy to help. College students, of course, I mean, family, friends, community, anyone basically, especially with the internet is yours these days, right? I sound so old saying that, but the internet is a wonderful resource. And LinkedIn, especially for those of you who are on LinkedIn, it's super, super accessible these days to just cold contact someone, send an invite message, ask for some support, maybe you get to learn more about them. And you don't know where that might lead. It might be an interesting kind of journey in itself. So continuing on, where was I? Talking about opportunities. The correlations between factors of depression and the later summer when I was working with a longevity compound. It's basically a lifespan extending compound called rapamycin. It's a drug. Not going to be quizzed on the name later. I was working with that drug and looking at its effects on brain tissue in mice. I was really passionate about kind of contributing to, of course, in any way possible, contributing to finding a cure, finding treatment ailments for Alzheimer's, ALS, and similar neurodegenerative diseases, Parkinson's, Huntington's. And I wanted to contribute even in a small way. I was looking at a few protein pathways in the brain in these mice tissue and looking at the effect of this drug on them, because it's kind of an immunosuppressant known to help out, but I wanted to see if it would help in the brain, which was something that actually no one had looked into before, and I was really curious about that. So that just shows you why neuroscience is important, y'all, because an immunosuppressant that we don't know about what happens in the brain was able to look into that, and it actually was insightful. So wink, wink at neuroscience again, learn about the brain. But that both of those opportunities in high school were sort of my strong research experiences, and both of those was honestly through cold contacting, searching on the internet for hours and hours. And to be honest, I think nowadays, I mean, it's a couple of years removed from that, and I think even in these couple of years, there's been a lot more online databases that come up with opportunities, and you do have to invest some energy and effort into reaching out for those, but it's really valuable and it does pay off. Your hard work is always returned to you multiple fold, I believe. So, and of course, again, if you reach out to someone on LinkedIn, like if you reached out to me on LinkedIn, for instance, about like a neuroscience opportunity for high schoolers, I'd be perfectly happy to point you in a right direction or in a more effective direction than searching, or perhaps like that. So moving on from there, let's see what other events I can talk about here. You might see that I'm high-fiving a cat over there. I used to volunteer with the local animal shelter, a cat sanctuary actually. Spent a lot of my time with the animals there. To be honest, I was very much a dog person before I went there, but it really opened up my eyes. And what I want to kind of make a point about with that is that do try out new opportunities in high school, whether it be community service, maybe joining a new club at your school, that perhaps you're not the most interested in or kind of like, not really my thing. I'd still recommend you try them out. In fact, I told you about how I wasn't quite a coding person. Well, when I was working on the Factors of Depression project, that was linked with coding and Python to be specific. And after I went through that experience, I realized that, yeah, I kind of confirmed that I wasn't quite interested in coding, but I was glad to go through that because I wouldn't have a regret later on knowing that, what if I was actually successful at coding, but I never knew about it? So it's nice to get those initial trial and error experiences on early in high school, because it kind of gives you clarity about what directions you can go in, pursue in college and as a career. And as we all know, college is fun, but college is also expensive. So it is a huge investment on time and resources. And it's nice to kind of, you don't of course have to absolutely know exactly what you want to do in college. But if you have this whole big bubble of ideas, and you can start narrowing them down a little bit before you get to college, it can help so much. And I'll talk about this later, about exploring in college. You might see I'm wearing a yellow shirt there, and the pictures below that, those are actually from a neuroscience competition for high schoolers called the Brain Bee. And it was honestly mind-blowing experiences. I was able to get to self-study a little bit of neuroscience, engage with other folks who were interested in the brain. The picture below is actually from the Bay Area Brain Bee. So if any of you guys, are in the local Bay Area and want to give neuroscience a shot, I'd highly recommend the Bay Area Brain Bee. The one above is in Sacramento, because I'm from the Sacramento region. Bay Area might be closer, obviously, but shout out to them. It's a day full of, you get to listen to amazing guest speakers, professors. I was able to look at a confocal microscope for the first time at one of these sessions. So you never know. I was able to see minute little hippocampal cells in the brain. It was pretty cool. Blew my mind. So amazing events like that, neuroscience, and the peers that I'd met along the way made the journey even more impactful. What I want to tell you about this, I'm trying to tie every one of my experiences to kind of an advice point for y'all, so I'm not just rambling on about me. I would say that the peers that you meet along the way, both in your school community and outside of your school community, can be long-lasting connections. In fact, I'm still in touch with several people that I've met from Brain Bee, and whether it be regional Brain Bee, I now live in the Bay Area, I didn't when I was younger, but I keep in touch with those friends, even friends who I competed in with at the National Brain Bee, I keep in touch with. Several of them are actually involved with my nonprofit organization, Simply Neuroscience, that was mentioned before. So in a way, those friendships and relationships and connections can have a really large impact later on. They can support you when everyone in your cohort is in college and you're trying to find someone for something, you never know who might come through. So that's just kind of a note in that your relationships developing from early on can really be impactful later on in life. I know everyone says that, but it's honestly very true. I've had many of my friends come through many times. I've offered to help out friends many times. So it's important to have those kind of reciprocal relationships. There's a NorCal STEM fair sign over there. I told you all about science fairs already, and ISEF and CSEF were really a big part. Loved science fairs, and I honestly recommend that you do them with all my heart. And of course, I don't want to take up too much of this time talking about science fairs, of course. I'll leave I believe my social media info is at the end of the presentation, so if you guys have any specific questions about that, we'll be happy to chat later. The picture with the colorful green chairs over there and the women all sitting around the table, that is from a leadership meeting with an organization called 500 Women Scientists. As was mentioned in the lovely intro, I was involved with Girls in STEM advocacy since about freshman year of high school. I had started a youth chapter of this organization at my school and created one of the first support groups for young girls at my high school because that was lacking. And so I strongly believe that having those sort of support groups is really important. I think identity-based groups especially is really important because it's nice to have an older mentor to look up to, for instance, who understands where you're coming from. And so that's something that goes on into college as well. I'll talk about it in the next part, but really embracing your identity is also super important, I believe. And reaching out for appropriate support from older folks is also very, very helpful. If we could go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So Simply Neuroscience, I'll cover very briefly. The reason why I'm putting this before college and after high school is because it actually came through in the transition of my own high school to college journey, basically. So I was telling you about the community of people that you meet along the way. Well, the reason that I actually founded Simply Neuroscience was because I wanted to create a collaborative community where people of all educational backgrounds could unite. And this is a value that you will see in college as well. Some of my closest friends in college come outside of my little neuroscience bubble. One of them is an environmental engineer. One of them is a political science major who's interested in theater. So you will have friends from very diverse educational backgrounds in college, and having the ability to have collaboration between those different groups is very important because one, you all share a love for learning, and two, you can unite your distinct interests to make a greater impact on your community. And Simply Neuroscience, honestly, is interdisciplinary based for that exact reason. I have friends who come from behavioral economics all the way through artificial intelligence. And I'm sitting here in the middle just thinking, gosh, these are amazing interests. So that brought everyone together in this amazing community. I founded it May 2019. I believe it was actually the day after I graduated high school. So it was quite the big part of my summer, and even till now, I spend a lot of time on it. It's really dear to me. Um, Quick shout out, of course, if any of you are interested in neuroscience, because I do want to push educational resources in neuro out to younger folks like yourselves. There is a virtual conference happening later this fall in late August, and feel free to DM me with about more info about this later. I do want to push it all to you out. I'll push it out to all of you guys to make sure that this is accessible to you, since of course neuro opportunities are hard to come across early on, unfortunately. We go on to the next slide, please. All right, moving to college. Next slide, please. Got some photos lined up for y'all. All right, so I entered college at Columbia University in fall of last year. September is when the academic year starts. And to be honest, I love Columbia. Let's just get it out. I love this school, and I could talk about it for hours, but I want to focus more on the selection process of how you can gather research about a college, what the college experience is like, things that are more applicable to you guys outside of my love for my school. So these are some pretty pictures of Columbia you got there. Columbia's in New York City. And when I was researching colleges, to be honest, I was very focused on, I want to go to a private university in California. And that was kind of it. Honestly, all the East Coast colleges that I applied to, kind of Midwest, East Coast, were all kind of an afterthought. I wanted to stay home close to my parents in California. And I mean, who wants to leave California when everything's all perfect here, right? Once a California person, always a California person. But when researching schools, I was really interested in one, research. I really wanted to go to a research powerhouse school because that was something that was really important to me from high school onwards, and I wanted a school that could cater to that. Second, being that location is important. If it's a school that's in the middle of nowhere, that's cool. But considering that you want a research institution powerhouse or many opportunities in kind of the surrounding regions, that's a little bit difficult. Three being, I was really interested in a multidisciplinary framework that was built in at the very core, and no pun intended for later. So I wanted a school that could support that, kind of an insight and that perspective from every student and unite them in that interdisciplinary framework. So considering those factors, and of course, California was my number one factor, but I also thought these were very important. And of course, financial considerations, distance, everything from home, that all factors in. These are just more relevant to what I'm talking about today, but of course, do your full research on every college that you're looking into. Absolutely cover every base, absolutely cover every base. I will say that again. It's really important, and you don't want to regret later on, because college applications themselves are expensive. It can be like $80, $90 an application, guys. It's pretty tough. So the next part I want to talk about is, let's see. I think I'll give a brief rundown of why I decided Columbia over other schools. One, they were very accessible research opportunities starting from freshman year itself. So if that is something that is important to you, then do look into how available opportunities are for freshmen, because at some public universities and some private universities, there is much more of a preference for older undergraduate students, so upperclassmen, to be kind of your first choice for hiring them for internships, for instance. Why would you want to take, if I was a professor, I would much prefer to take someone who was an upperclassman who had taken advanced biology courses over a young little first year student who's maybe just taking a bio course, experimenting, figuring out their major, right? It's a matter of what's practical for professors and older mentors as well. But at a lot of private research institutions, there's a lot more funding and support for postdocs and PIs and labs that they're a lot more willing to take on younger students as well, to mentor them through the process. And so at Columbia, I really love that. I'm involved with 2 labs on campus during the academic school year, and I joined pretty much within the first month that I came to campus. I had been in touch over the summer just because I was so interested in their work. So I was like, oh my gosh, can I get involved? And I think in that cold contacting, right, that was cold contacting again. And the key to that was being early and responding in a timely manner, right? You don't want to make a professor sit in your inbox, let your email sit in your inbox for a week. You want to be active and really taking initiative. And I honestly think it just came down to demonstrating passion. I was super, super interested in their work. And even when going in for interviews for the initial positions, research investigator assistant positions, I really tried to convey that. And a tip is that even if your background doesn't quite line up with the position, it's completely fine as long as you demonstrate why this is going to be an insightful opportunity for you and why it's going to be useful for you down the line in your career, graduate school, and beyond. Whether that is in terms of gaining valuable skills like coding from some experiences, whether that's in terms of just the aspect of learning in a lab can give you a different perspective on your work in the future. A multitude of things, honestly. Those are just two that came off the top of my head, but really demonstrating why specifically this is going to be useful to you. And I know it's a little bit daunting when you have to cold contact maybe 50 professors to get one or two responses back, but I think that when you personalize your messages and really make your interest shine through, it it portrays you in a much more positive light to professors. So that's something that I found very insightful from hearing from older peers as well, and I really want to make sure that you guys understand that cold contacting and networking really depend on not just doing it for numbers or kind of just doing this for the sake of doing an internship, but rather you want to be passionate about what you're doing and you want to make sure that you're happy doing this and not just doing this because doing an internship is good for medical school or something like that. I think one of the biggest points that I figured out from college application process and future medical school or graduate school process is that admissions officers can tell when you're passionate about an opportunity versus when you're not. And I mean, I'm obviously not an admissions officer. I don't know how exactly they can tell, but sometimes when you're writing about it, the way that you write about it can really come across. You know, it's the whole cliche statement of your passion shines through, right? Well, it truly does. And I think it can also convey in the way that, you know, let's say you have an alumni interview in the college admissions process. You chat with them on and on and on. You can tell them on and on and about what you're working about. That's really great for someone to see. It shows that you're enthusiastic about it. Let's see. Looking at kind of a list of things that I wanted to touch on. I guess I'll briefly touch on kind of how I got involved in activities on campus and how the exploring aspect that I touched on can come into play. So I obviously came into college thinking that I was going to do something related to neuroscience. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to major in yet. To be honest, I'm still not quite sure. I kind of narrowed it down to neuro, life sciences, and medical humanities, which is more interdisciplinary. But came in, I remember within the first couple weeks of school, there's sort of an activity fair that happens at Columbia and at most colleges. And at this activity fair, there's hundreds of student organizations that come out and cover the campus with booths and tables set up. And they're all like, hey, you want to join? And they also offer you some free stuff. But anyways, there is a multitude of opportunities out there and you can't possibly get involved in 15 clubs at the same time unless you want to spend a lot of your time on that. That's pretty crazy though. I don't recommend that. So how do you cut down on the number of clubs that you're actively involved in and passionate about is to first try and break outside of your little bubble existing from high school. You know, I was kind of involved in singing when I was a little bit younger, but it was not a big interest for me in middle school and high school. And as an example, I signed up for a club that was for bad a cappella. It was called Offbeat, I believe, and it was literally, the club description was a cappella for bad singers. So you never know, it was a pretty fun club. Unfortunately, it got shut down with COVID and everything, but it was something that I would never have imagined doing. But I was like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna write my name down in my email for the sign-up list. Let's do this. So in the first few weeks, it's completely fine to jot your name down for a variety of things. Go to meetings once in a while for clubs, go to the first meetings, intro meetings, cherry pick a little bit, and that way you can get to interact with more people. When you're a first year student, you really want to go out of your small initial social circle from perhaps visiting campus or perhaps the initial student orientation group and reach out to as many other new folks as you can, because everyone is in it, everyone is new, right? So everyone is willing to be friends with you and learn more about where you're from, what you're interested in, and things like that. So going to club meetings and such is an amazing way to get introduced to new people. And of course, this is also applicable in high school too, right? There's probably a number of clubs at your school. And maybe when Club Rush or whatever it's called, Club Fair, Activity Fair happens, unfortunately due to COVID, of course, it's going to be different this fall. Um, so I would still recommend going to those initial intro meetings and coming across just very cool individuals. Highly recommend that. So explore as much as you can in college is a big theme. Have flexibility in your schedule though. I think the biggest duality that most people is key to understanding is you should have flexibility and time to explore, but also have some sort of a plan, a rough draft. It can be a very rough draft, but have some sort of a plan going into college, as in what might you want to do in the future? Do you just want to go straight from bachelor's degree to going into a job? Do you want to go to graduate school? Do you want to do a master's? Do you want to do take a break after undergrad? Think about it, something like that. Go into it with a sort of a game plan already established, so that when you initially get in touch with your academic mentors in the first weeks of school, there's often an advisor that is assigned to each student. You can kind of outline and brainstorm plans with them. And of course, as I mentioned before, college is very expensive, college is very time intensive, and in the 4 or 5, perhaps 3 years that you are there in an undergrad usually, you want to optimize the opportunities that are available to you, optimize the courses that are available to you, and not kind of veer off into a sidetrack too much, because it's going to be difficult to come back if you want to switch majors or something. Another initial tip at the start is to try to explore as many introductory courses as possible. Columbia's core curriculum has it sort of built into the framework. Many schools have a general education requirement set where it's like you're required to take a science course, required to take an art course, maybe a writing course, something like that. So do a little bit of nitpicking here and there, kind of sign up for a couple courses, maybe seminar style. Of course, clubs can also help you explore academic interests a little bit. If you were interested in entrepreneurship, for instance, you might go and sign up for such a club. I also don't want to run over time. Do you know how much more time you have?
It's fine. You have like 5 more minutes.
Sure, okay.
Oh yeah, sorry about the disruption earlier. My internet went out, so.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. Zoom issues it's okay. Yeah, so I want to zoom through a little bit, and well, I just blanked on the point I was gonna make. It'll come back. Anyways, so here's what it is. The college application tip that I would recommend is at the very core of your college application is to really picture yourself as a college student. Pretend that you're me. Pretend that you're me. I'm in college. What am I going to do when I wake up? What am I going to do in the afternoon? What club meetings am I going to go to? In the evening, would I go out like into the nearby community in Morningside Heights in Manhattan and go out for dinner? Maybe I just chat with a couple of friends from my literature humanities class over dinner. So kind of put yourselves, I'm of course giving an example of my experience in college, put yourselves into the shoes of a student there and really try to get to learn what the overall vibe is at that place. Because when colleges specifically ask you, why do you want to go here? You don't want to just quote their website back to them. That's a big no-no. They already know that they're a very cool this and this and this. They're doing that. They're doing this cool club. All this is happening. Yes, but tell me how you would fit into that picture. Remember, college applications admissions are so competitive these days. And, for the most selective colleges, for the Ivy Leagues, for instance, there may be 4 or 5 students admitted out of every 100 that apply. And everyone is going to talk about why this school is cool, why they're doing great stuff, why there's a very new, cool neuroscience institution there, and I want to go do research there, yada, yada, yada. Most people have that same kind of an underlying interest, but really showing how you would fit in specifically, that you're already envisioning yourself there. shows that you are taking initiative to do that much research, first of all, and that you are invested, right? When you put in that much time and it shows, that means you are invested. And it shows that, this might be your dream. This is what your life may be like at that college when you're accepted. So honestly, it comes back to the point of truly do your research, especially now, like since everything's online, there's no visiting campuses and such. Do go on the website and look for the college's social media pages. It gives you more of a quirky, humorous look at the college most of the times. It's very vibrant. Look into YouTube videos from current colleges, college students. Dorm tours are very common. Kind of a day in the life of a college student at Columbia is very common, for instance. So do look into those kind of resources. And of course, I'm personally, my messages, emails, LinkedIn is always open if you want to chat about Columbia in specific. And most people are also super open to chat about their experiences in college. So do your research, to sum it up. Let's see. So I think a quick thing I'll touch about is about some people wonder about schedule in college and how that works. How do you fit your major with kind of general requirements? Columbia is set up with a core curriculum that defines some courses that I have to take, such as literature, humanities, which I name dropped earlier, frontiers of science, writing. There's also global core classes that kind of bridge outside the traditional European framework of interdisciplinary curriculum. And that takes up usually one class spot per semester, I would say. But when you get to upperclassmen years, there's a lot more flexibility. If you're pre-med or pre-graduate school, for instance, some people tend to take pre-med requirements, friends, and take general chemistry, gen bio, gen physics, things like that. Also, I would recommend looking into some of the cool courses offered at the school. It kind of gives you an idea of, are they really flexible with their courses? Are they really as innovative as they tell you on their website? Look into those kind of things as well. So most of my schedule, I would say, is, since I'm not declared yet with my major, still a little bit of exploring here and there, taking neuro seminars, public health courses, core curriculum, a blend of that. I would say what I love most is the flexibility about my school and the flexibility to explore and the wonderful people that I've met there. When you do go visit a campus, or just when you're exploring online, make sure that it is a community that shares that same love of learning. I know high school, there's kind of a different gap between students, right? Because there's students of all interests, all backgrounds, kind of whether they're motivated or not really motivated in school, things like that. So do look into that as well. I would say, yeah, that was one of the deciding factors for me for Columbia, actually. I was telling you about how I was interested in California universities. I really fell in love with Columbia when I visited. I saw that students were actually as passionate as they seemed on the photos on the website, all smiling and cheery, right? And I found that the city was a great location. It was an extension of the classroom. So location does play a big part in where you go to college. It defines the people that live there, the opportunities that are available, and the type of curriculum even, because you can directly extend it to what is outside your window. And that's pretty cool to see in a class. I will also, I'll just like leave it on this point basically. High school is difficult. And college is a completely different world from high school. So I just want to say that if you are having maybe not the best experience in high school at the moment, if you feel confined, that your interests can't fully be explored, one, like reach out to people in your community, talk with people in your community. I think talking and reaching out for help is the biggest part, because people can suggest things to make your experience more worthwhile. Teachers can help so much. Teachers are really underrated. They can go above and beyond and make your life so much more interesting and helpful in their classes. And just be on the lookout for colleges. I know college applications are really intimidating, but it's like a rainbow. There is a pot of gold waiting on the other side. There are wonderful things to come. I would say 99% of the people that I have come across in my college education and such would say that college was a wonderful experience, and that they're really glad to, even if they had a meaningful high school experience, that college was building off of it even more. So just a leaving piece of advice to leave you on, in that high school is not the end of the world, right? There is college, and even if you don't decide to go to college, you want to go to trade school or community college and then go to undergrad institution, there's many options out there. And keep your eyes open and keep your heart open. It's okay if high school sucks. It's fine. If you wouldn't mind actually just moving to the last slide. So I think my social media info is on there. So, I mean, if anyone needs to leave early or anything, you'd still have my social media questions, and I'll turn it over to you guys if you have any questions.
Thank you so much for, taking the time out to speak with us today. I'm sure everyone that was listening got a lot of insight into the college applications and your tips. They were really, really helpful for me personally. And then I wanted to ask anyone who was listening, if you have questions, put them in the chat box. Okay. All right, so Hannah Del Barrio is asking, what advice do you have for starting a science research project?
Like I mentioned before, it's about a spark of curiosity. It's about seeing a gap, and it's about maybe just wanting to apply your scientific knowledge even more. I would say that perhaps I'll give an example of, which one should I give? I'll give an example of my friend who is now involved in traumatic brain injury research. They personally experienced a concussion early on in college, and it honestly really changed their life. It is very difficult to go through brain injuries, and they were interested in learning more after recovery about mechanisms of recovery for traumatic brain injury patients, or perhaps rehabilitation techniques for them. So that was something that came out of their own experiences that they were curious about. But I also know of other friends who were simply, they saw a gap. I saw a gap in this rapamycin drug-related research in that it was not really touching on the brain at all. And so, considering that the brain is such an important organ in our body, I was like, this should be investigated. And so, I saw that gap there. A curiosity for some folks may be, what is attention? How does attention work? It seems like such a mundane little thing, but there's so much more behind it. So I honestly say that most ideas fit into one of those three niche categories, but you can go from anywhere and everywhere.
Awesome. Also, we have like around 10 minutes left, so we'll just let anyone else ask questions and then hopefully wrap it up. Okay, so Henna is asking, how many volunteering hours did you have in high school?
Honestly, it's been quite a while since I ran the numbers, so I don't have it off the top of my head, sorry. I would say that, just as a general thing, that it's important to invest time into kind of a couple of different community service or volunteering initiatives and such, and show that you have made a meaningful impact on your community. Of course, if you're helping out with a school club, with harvest festivals or local small scale events in your community, that's also really important because it shows that you're engaging, you're an active citizen, right? You're giving back. But I think that what colleges like to see is depth more so than breadth in some ways. So even if your profile is kind of, your interests are kind of all over the place, still show that you are not like scatterbrained or anything like that, but rather you are exploring and you are meaningfully exploring.
Awesome. Next question, Priyan is asking if you could talk more about life at Columbia and in New York City, and whether life at the school is more revolved around the school or the city.
Yeah, so I would say that the relation between Columbia and New York City is that students view the city as an extended classroom. And the reason for this is that Columbia, being located in the heart of New York City and Manhattan, in a community specifically called Morningside Heights, the main campus itself is not super, super large. And of course, if you've visited New York City, you know that many buildings go up more than sideways, unlike California at times. So the undergrad campus, I would say, let me do the math real quick. I believe it exists in about 8 blocks. So I'm not sure if you guys are like super familiar with New York lingo, but blocks, I would say, yeah, let's not do the math on that right now. You can look it up. But 8 blocks, I would say. And then, like a whole street wide, of course. But that is the undergrad campus called the Morningside campus because it's Morningside Heights. The graduate schools, there's a couple that are around the area. And then a little bit more uptown, about 50 blocks north, there is the Uptown campus, which includes the medical school, many graduate schools. There's the Cancer Research Center is up there. The Zuckerman Institute's about 10 blocks away from campus. That's the Neuroscience Institute that's new. New York Presbyterian is pretty famous, a hospital that's pretty close by. Mount Sinai System is pretty close by. Those might be hospitals that came up in the news recently related to COVID. Doing a great job, guys. But why I bring all these up is that there's a lot more happening. There's just as many things happening off campus as there are on campus, but it's not so that you drive 5 miles. Columbia shuttles can take you up and down. I know some people who intern at museums locally and they just take a bus or a subway and hop on and hop off. So life at Columbia is centered around Morningside Heights because there are so many, academic institutions, buildings on campus and things like that. But it is a conscious decision of some folks to go and explore opportunities in the city beyond campus. One of my research opportunities is on campus in a building, and the other is on the Uptown campus at the medical center. That was a long answer.
No, that's great. All right, so the next question from Yadro is, I know stats aren't everything, but if you want, can you tell us more about your stats in high school?
Completely honest again, it's been a while, so I don't remember all the numbers. I will say though that, like you said, stats aren't everything, and they differ from person to person and geographic location from another. So for a general overview, I also take this with a grain of salt. I was valedictorian in high school, ranked at the top of my class, so that kind of gives you an idea of GPA. I also say take a grain with a salt because I ended up applying to colleges in the fall of junior year, actually. I had credits built up from middle school from taking advanced courses, and so I actually just decided to apply straight to colleges in junior year instead of taking like a full course load of my entire senior year at a community college because I really did want that 4-year experience and not transferring. That was my personal decision. Of course, that does not define anything about transferring or anything. So with applying to Columbia after 3 years of high school, my profile was a little bit more off from your traditional 4-year application, right? So my stats are different because my GPA calculation was different. A lot of my senior and junior year classes got lumped together in a 3rd year, things like that. But I would say overall performed well on standardized testing, had a solid GPA, had, is that, I can't even remember like what other numbers there are. Had a significant
and like SATs and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. Had a pretty significant scores. And took a like AP exam scores were pretty good. I think took like, I can't remember how many APs. We'll leave it there. Those are kind of my general stats.
Awesome. Okay, so so Yadra says thank you. Okay, Shrishti is asking, this was a very insightful presentation. Could you talk more about the organization, the nonprofit that you started, the one focusing on advocating for girls in STEM?
Sure. So actually, I think you might be referring to the Girls in STEM Club I started at my school. That was affiliated with a nonprofit called 500WS for short, but it wasn't an independent organization of itself. The independent nonprofit that I now lead is called Simply Neuroscience, and that's the one based around interdisciplinary neuro. So that was sort of an after high school sort of an activity. The Girls in STEM Club in high school was focused around bringing in guest speakers for presentations to hear more about careers, so career exploration. We hosted sort of awareness events, bringing light to the gap in STEM of women through our school, different things like that. So.
Oh, okay. And last question, did you talk about neuroscience in your Common App essay?
I will say that I don't remember this again. I'm so sorry. It's like it's been so like far removed that it's just like fading into the back of my memory. I do recall talking about like neuroscience in essays though. I can't remember if it was my Common App or anything, but of course, since it was a major interest of mine at the time, definitely came up. I believe that, in Columbia specific apps, I probably talked about neuroscience innovations happening at the school and why I was interested in their specific neuro program versus a neuro program at Harvard or Stanford or Yale or things like that. So.
Okay, awesome. So I think that's all the time we have for questions. Shrishti also says thank you for answering her question. And yeah, anyone listening, hold on, sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, yeah. So yeah, everyone would like to thank you for taking the time out to speak with us. Everyone listening, her Instagram and Twitter are on this slide. So if you'd like to note that down, make sure you do. Thank you, Chinmayi. If everyone is good to go, then I will end the meeting now.
All right, thanks so much for having me, guys. Thanks for your
Thank
questions.
you.
Bye-bye.